Welcome to the What Happens Next YouTube channel. What we're aiming to do with this channel is share content designed to make sure that you're supported through whatever's next in your life. And we'd love to continue to do that. I've got a favour to ask today, and what I'd ask you to do is just subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it really helps us deliver really good quality content on a consistent basis. Thank you, and let's go on to the interview. Welcome to What Happens Next, the channel and the show where we talk about the period of life when we're often at a crossroads and we're thinking about what happens next in our lives. I'm your host, Chris Daems, and I am getting real privilege to interview real experts about what the challenges and the opportunities we face when we reach a certain stage of life, and what should we be considering thinking about when we're at that stage where we start to think what happens next. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Jo. Jo, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm really well. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And you caught me as I was making my coffee, dancing to a bit of Beyonce, which you
didn't strike me as being a bit of a Beyonce man, but hey, you never know. A bit of twerking around the kitchen.
Love it. I've got a sign in my kitchen, and I'm really proud of this sign because we've got a sign that says "We dance in this kitchen," right? Okay. And when my daughter comes home from university, one of the things that we always do is have a little dance around the kitchen. So before we start talking about age and the challenges and opportunities we face at a certain stage in life, what's your kitchen disco #1 song?
Oh God, I haven't. So first of all, during lockdown, we got a glitter ball.
Oh, so cool.
We've got glitter ball-y music going down, and we did have the odd disco during lockdown. So, but I'm much more a sort of indie rock, glam rock type of person.
Yeah.
So a little bit of Bon Jovi, a little bit of AC/DC, Guns N' Roses. One of my favourite bands is Muse, so I'm a bit of a rocker.
Yeah, I saw Muse at Wembley a few years ago. They were amazing.
They're really good, aren't they? Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about you, Jo.
So I am, so a little bit about me. I'm an estate agent and I'm based in the Surrey Hills. And much as I love my job, it's a job that I don't think I can grow. I don't want to be too old doing. So I don't want to be the old lady that rocks up to try to value or sell you your property. So I've been an estate agent for a while and I love it. I love my job. No day is ever the same. So yeah, my kids have left home. I'm not experiencing the empty nest. I'm loving it. I've got my youth back again to a certain extent, my freedom. So yeah, that's me basically in a nutshell.
And how are the kids?
Yeah, they're good. So one of them's in Australia and she's coming back for a couple of weeks next month. So I'm really looking forward to that. And the other one lives in Brighton. So yeah.
And what did you do? Was it just the way you looked at the kids leaving that made you avoid that empty nest feeling?
The empty nest feeling, for me, I've been a single parent for quite a while. And so and I was dating my partner. I'm now living with him, but I was dating my partner. So it gave me an element of freedom to date and to not to worry about the kids anymore. And I did have to worry about the cats, but not the kids. So, and the cats, you can get someone to feed them. You can't necessarily get someone to come in and feed your kids. Yeah. So, so it was a freeing. I mean, I miss them. I love them, but I spent a lot more time and energy with them than if I had been in a partnership. So it was like, You
were ready.
Yeah, I was ready.
How was it? Because it's really interesting. We're thinking about this a lot in our house at the minute. Charlotte is 21, Sophie's still 13, so we've got a few years to go. But I think one of the things that I think about, and I often have a lot of conversations with my clients about, is that change in identity when you're not mum and dad and as reliant anymore. How is that for you in terms of a shift?
So that's an interesting one, because that's it's a big shift. It's a big shift for a lot of people because but my identity wasn't all wrapped up in my children. So it was, I have a sense of purpose outside of my children. So therefore, part of my identity stopped, whereas another part of my identity could then grow into a different role and a different purpose. I think we all need a sense of purpose. And if you are just a mother, then your sense of purpose diminishes when they leave home.
Yeah, it's having that balance, isn't it? And other stuff outside of being a mum or a dad or work or stuff like that. So I'm sure we're going to talk about balance and wearing different hats throughout this interview. But what I am obsessed about at the minute, and I'm listening to a lot, is your podcast. Tell me a bit about that.
Thank you. So the podcast, so I always wanted to do a podcast. Well, not always. In the last few years, I wanted to do a podcast. And I thought I was going to do a podcast on property, and I was going to call it Selling Surrey, on a theme that is on TV. Obviously not in the same way, but I was, and I realised that property is very visual. And so an audio podcast, which is mainly how people listen to podcasts, is not necessarily how you're going to sell a property or sell the idea or keep people interested. And as I started to do the podcast training to learn how to do podcasting, I realized that my obsession is the aging process and growing old. I'm absolutely obsessed about it. And as I'm going to be always growing older or always aging, it was something that I started to look into. And my co-host is a psychotherapist. So I'm getting psychotherapy on the way as well.
Bit of free therapy, but
Absolutely.
You know what? But this is the weird thing about podcasting. It's a great way. I think we've had this conversation before, and this is my second podcast. I hosted a podcast about kindness for many years before we started What Happens Next. But the great thing about podcasting for me is you get to interview people and ask them a bunch of questions and learn from the experience without sounding a bit weird, because just phoning people up randomly saying an insight. But when you've got a podcast, apparently, Joe, you're allowed.
You can ask really strange questions. Absolutely. Yeah.
Love it.
Well, for our guests, we do ask, are there any topics we can't talk about before we go on to the podcast?
Why the obsession?
So the obsession. Okay, so it's not necessarily, it's not getting old, because everybody keeps telling me getting old is a privilege, and it absolutely is, because there are some people that don't reach my age at all. So my dad never reached my age. I'm 62, just about to turn 63 in 2 weeks, which is something I'm not looking forward to. But it's not getting old per se, it's aging. And so the obsession is like, things keep changing, and it's a surprise all the time, and trying to approaching it with humor, but actually sometimes it's just a bit like, for God's sakes, getting ready in the morning, making myself some shade of normal, which is like when in my 20s and 30s, I could literally just get up, put on a pair of jeans and go out of the house.
Yeah.
Now it takes hours to just look normal. So the obsession is, skin moving in a different direction, hair changes, teeth changes, physical changes, and what you need to do in order to make yourself look presentable to get out the front door. I'm still
really learning how to do that.
Really
I'm just like I just rock up.
Wait till you get to my age.
Yeah. What's the biggest surprise? What's been the thing that surprised you the most?
Well, that's an interesting question. What's been the biggest surprise? I think actually it is the physical changes. And the physical changes are, there are things like skin. So, doing things in the gym, and you're watching, and you catch yourself in the mirror and your skin's moving in a completely different direction, or it's gone into some kind of creasy mold and looks like it needs ironing. It's the changes. I was laughing with my osteopath because I have done my back in doing lifting. It's like, it's actually now becoming an extreme sport just to go to the gym because I'm so much older. But and don't get me wrong, I love it and I need to do it. But it's things like I don't know, your eyesight, the quality of your hair, the color of your hair, everything. My teeth need a bit more. Everything needs a little bit more care in terms of what you look like. Whereas before, when I had flawless skin, no wrinkles, hair that didn't matter what I did with it, I didn't need to dye it, didn't need to style it. Now it's just a little bit, it's the physical stuff, and it's not just how I look, it's how I feel as well, and how my body operates. I'm not as flexible and as I used to be, although I am doing yoga. It's just it just slowly, and if you're not careful with the maintenance, it can degenerate quite a lot, and therefore you start. I mean, I heard the other day, if you are over 65 and you don't exercise, you don't lift weights, etc. But if you're over 65 and you break your hips and you go for an operation on breaking your hips, your chances of dying within a year are high.
Yeah,
I mean, that's too.
Yeah, that there was a Diary of a CEO podcast, funny enough.
I think it was that, and I heard it on
Peter Attilia.
Yeah,
and he was talking about that, and I it's really interesting because we do talk about physical well-being on What Happens Next quite a lot, and we've interviewed guests, and I think the interesting thing is the importance, as you're doing, of lifting weights actually. Maintaining that strength as we age, even though it can feel a little tougher when we get older to do it, right?
Yeah, it does. It does, but it's important. It's really important for women, especially because as we go through menopause, we lose estrogen, and therefore we are more susceptible to osteoporosis. And if you've got muscles protecting your bones, you're less likely to fracture them if you do fall. So the funny thing about falling is that if you fall over, you're still young. If you have a fall, you're old. And so I've never had a fall. I'm never going to have a fall. I'm always going to fall over.
Apart from when you lifted those weights in the gym.
When I lifted those weights at the gym, I'm stronger. But it's all sorts of things about. You and I have spoken offline about the blue zones, and I know you've spoken before, but the Japanese blue zone is they still sit on the floor at age 101 or whatever it is, and they can get up. Yeah. Whereas I think if you put the UK population at 100 on the floor, they wouldn't be able to get up.
Yeah, it's that combination of both flexibility and strength is the key, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's really good. You know what I'm really curious about? Tell me a little bit about your podcast fellow host, because I'm really fascinated about the difference in your dynamic, because your different personalities, and it's a really good partnership, actually.
Well, thank you. So I've known Galen for how old's my oldest? About 25, 26 years. So she was, when I decided I was going to do this, I definitely need a co-host. Unlike you, I can't talk very well to myself. Okay, so I needed someone to bounce off, and she is, highly experienced, over 30 years in psychotherapy, and she's got a much more. So mine is like, why? Because am I allowed to swear on your podcast? So the podcast is when the fuck did I become old, and it's like, why the fuck is this happening to me? It's because it's just a shock. It's like, when did I turn into my mother when I looked in the mirror? That kind of thing, and so it's like, I want all these questions answered, and Galen kind of tends to be the voice of reason. We decided that the podcast wasn't going to be educational. We could do that. We could go into sort of psychotherapy type, this is what you can do. It's more of a sort of entertainment with her, with me being able to go, look at this, bashing her and going, Joe, just take another look at it, blah, blah, blah. So the dynamic is good. It's like, I'm going, why? And Galen's going, hang on a second, let's just take a breath.
But I think having those, and this is what we've learned a lot on What Happens Next, just those different perspectives allow you to then turn around and go, well, that's interesting, and that's what I've got. I've definitely got from your podcast in terms of doing that. So we've talked about the physical changes getting older. Talk to me about some of the other stuff. How has your perspective on the world and perspective on life changed?
So the perspective on the world and life is I think in terms of, because before I did the podcast, I went and did a little bit of research. I did a little bit of research from the female perspective, but interestingly enough, our figures are 50-50 men to women. So there are obviously a lot of men that want to know what's going on for women in terms of how the hell do I relate to my woman who's aging or anything like that. And so, but it's in terms of psychological, as you know, it's all about role changes and purpose. So first of all, what happens to us is that our children leave home, then we retire, and we lose contact with our children as much. We lose contact with our friends from work as much. And that happens more so for men than it does for women, in terms of like a lot of their whole social life is wrapped up in work, and then work's cut off. So it's all about role changes and finding a different purpose in life. Yeah. There's also the pressure of, and I don't have that because my parents are no longer alive, but the pressure of having elderly parents and having children that have not quite got themselves into adulthood. So that's a sandwich generation that a lot of people find, and they're still working. So it's like, where am I? Where am I and who am I on a psychological and emotional level in society? And of course, culturally, we don't include our elderly as much as some people like Japan, like the blue zone, like the blue zones. So we then become a bit more invisible. And it's a physical invisibility as well, because there are some celebrities out there trying their best to go to be a lot less, I don't know, operated on with a lot less Botox. For example, Pamela Anderson is she may have had some work, but she's going into sort of like more natural than she used to be, and she's getting a lot of stick for it. There are people going, she looks like a grandmother. Well, you know, she's in her 60s. She may well be a grandmother. Yeah. But what's wrong with looking like a grandmother? I know Brooke Shields. That right? Brooke Shields has written a book. She's been, because she was sexualized earlier, wasn't she? Early in her life. She's written a book on, you know, how people are being abusive to her for looking old. It's like, well, but it happens. So there's like, not only are we
facing the interesting thing, how do we just have better conversations about this? I mean, I look at that and say what's interesting to me is that media perception of somebody isn't always what most people think, right? It's where we are. But how do we change our cultural attitude to just have better conversations about aging and appreciate that these changes are going to come to us all? And
they are.
And actually, how do we do that?
Well, I mean, the media, not the media, but some of the celebrities are doing it for us. Some of them are doing it for us. Some of them are leading the way in as much as they are talking about it. I mean, we've got the lovely Davina who talked about a lot. She went into the menopause in great depth, and there's a lot of stuff on the menopause. We've got the likes of Jamie Lee Curtis, and as I say, Pamela Anderson, and we've got people that are saying, no, I'm getting old. And we've got some beautiful older women like Helen Mirren and Jane Judi Dench. It's about not lying down so much, but they're fighting an industry where over 50 you don't get as much work.
So it's interesting, isn't it? And on your, because I know you mentioned you did a lot of research and went out to speak to people. What, in your experience with the research you've done, are the real challenges for people who are in their 60s and beyond, but also the opportunities that people think they've got?
So the research that I did was mainly, what was sad was the fact that everybody's going through something, but not everybody feels that they can talk about it.
Interesting.
So I went to a couple of WI groups, and a lot of people approached me afterwards with their problems. So I talked about it in an open forum, and then a lot of people came up to me and said, oh, I've got this and I've got that.
Yeah.
It's like
that social stigma element.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't hear it openly because I'm admitting. So, you know what, Joe? I've had a couple of conversations this week about particularly about men's clubs and the fact. Have you read a book called Bowling Alone?
No. Should I?
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. It's about the decline of clubs across society in Western civilizations. And actually, I'm really fascinated by the like the Women's Institute is a brilliant club of people of support. And the conversations I've had this week is the fact that those clubs are absolutely amazing. But what fascinates me about your comment is in that supportive environment, people are still conscious of not being vulnerable. How do we?
It's perceived. It's perceived as a weakness, or has been perceived as a weakness, vulnerability, and also femininity has been perceived as a weakness in business as well. So we have this whole sort of like, I mean, there's a whole movement now, but there's still glass ceilings for women in industry. But we are moving forward in it, but we're still, our generation still held back by what you can and can't talk about.
So what would you, if you could have carte blanche and say, right, we can talk about anything, what would be top of the list?
Well, I think we talk about aging. I think we talk about, for me, it's like, why the fuck can't we age? Why will society? Why is society saying you're not allowed to be old? You're old. You go into a box. We don't see you, and then that annoys me, because like there's some gorgeous people, and why are we? It's all about especially now in the media and the social media, etc. It's all about how you look. And that's a shame. That's a shame, because we all buy into that.
As you say, that ignores what people with all this experience can bring to the table, right?
Yeah. And it makes a lot of lonely people. Lonely people.
Yeah, 100%. So some of these conversations, based on the research you did, didn't happen in the collective. But when as you say, that people were coming to speak to you individually, what were they saying then?
Well, it was mainly about roles, and so we had some people talking about what happens when the kids leave home, and do they have a relationship with their other half? What do we talk about after all these years? Do I like him anymore? I'm not sure. I'm a bit worried about that. So that I think that's key in preparing for later life, when there is no household maintenance to talk about, which is a bit dull anyway. But what do you do together? What are your common interests? And then when you retire, before you retire, you go out to work, come back, talk about your day. If you're constantly with each other, that was another thing. We're constantly with each other now. We've got nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
So we don't talk.
Do you this is the interesting thing. Do you think work plays a part? Because one of the things that we talk about quite a lot and what happens next is the fact that concept of work up to a particular age is actually from the industrial generation, and for a lot of us, continued work, even if we don't need the money to do it, might be part of that puzzle of later life, because we get to go out and have really interesting conversations with a bunch of people, and continue to find purpose and value.
Yeah, I agree with you. So we've done a podcast episode which hasn't been released yet on curiosity.
Yeah.
And how curiosity keeps you young, just going out and playful and interested. And so if you are, invisible as an older person, if you start asking questions, you become less invisible. People have to talk to you. But I think the whole thing about retirement and the cutoff point is a bit archaic. And as you know better than anybody else, a lot of people can't afford to retire at 67. Their pensions are not sorted out. If you're lasting 20, 25 years, that's a crisis. But in terms of having a purpose and having something to do and being curious and keeping young, absolutely, you need to do something that gets you out of your comfort zone, that gets you asking questions, that gets you thinking, because that keeps you young in attitude and young in brain as well.
So this is the interesting thing. I think my experience, and you're right, we are now as a society not as prepared as we once were to stop at a particular age. But even if you are, I think from a financial perspective, and we've got clients who are, that continued work can spark that curiosity and spark that innovation and spark that sort of just excitement of getting up in the morning and going, what's going to challenge me today? I think is the interesting thing. I'm curious about the because I haven't listened to it yet, clearly, because it's not available. But I'm curious about your favourite question to ask when you're being curious. What is that?
So it depends where I am, but my favourite question, it depends who I'm
talking to. Include the word fuck?
My answer might include the word fuck. Yeah, I've got a bit of a potty mouth. So my favorite was, it's curious, it's like, well, it's a kind of like, what makes you tick, what excites you, what have you done that's exciting?
That's a great
questions like, how are you, at our age are quite dangerous to ask, because you might get hours of how I actually am and what physically is going wrong with me at the moment. So what excites you, what have you done that's been exciting, in the last few days? So I go into the gym and talk to people and say, let's say, how are you doing? It's like, what have you done this week that's been exciting? Tell me, type thing.
Yeah, no, I love that. What makes you tick is a great question.
People don't always know how to answer that one either. So what makes you
tick? I you know what? I've got a thing about asking questions where people have got to actually think about the answer.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Sorry about that. Because I think they're the questions where you're getting those proper conversations.
Yeah,
is my perspective on it. One of the things that I'm really curious about, Joe, is mindset as we age, because I think there's a perspective that mindset's everything. I actually think there's probably more nuance to the impact of mindset on our lives. But as somebody who, and I know you've talked about in this on your podcast, and hopefully you don't mind if I mention it, somebody who's in their early 60s now, how has your mindset shifted? But how do you think the importance of keeping a growth mindset and a positive mindset, what's the impact of that in your future life, do you think?
Was it, if you look at people that don't have a growth mindset, don't have the curiosity and don't do anything, they're the ones though whose world closes in as they get older.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I mean, I've done a podcast. It's for me as well as everybody else, because it will keep me going until I can no longer talk, because it's a subject that I'm going to be growing into. But it is about my age. So, I mean, we're all going to grow old, hopefully, but we don't have to get old. We don't have to become, in the aging process does not have to shut us down. And what has been that, you work, you finish your life at, well, it used to be 60, it's now 60, well, then 65 and now 67. And then we pop you into retirement. And then when you've reached a certain stage, you go into a home and then you go out in a box. That encourages closed downness. And I think mindset is key, because if you're talking to someone and they've got a young, youthful, curious mind, you start not to see.
Don't see the age, right?
So when I said to people, I'm going to be doing this podcast about when the fuck did I become old and how how people of our age are invisible. People were saying to me, Joe, no, you're not invisible. You're a lovely, but you're attractive. Like, well, actually, I'm only attractive when you know me.
Interesting.
If you see what I mean. And because if I walk down the street next to a 30-year-old woman, I'm not going to get seen. She is. But when you know me, I'm going to get seen. If you see what I mean.
See, I this is a new perspective for me, Joe. I've got to be honest. So when did you start to notice this change of perspective? Like, is it something that you've recently noticed, or is it a thing that happens gradually? And what was the time you realised, well, actually, how people perceive me when they don't know me is different to how I used to be looked at, or
I think the last, how old am I? So I'm going to be 63. I think the last 10 years, so pre-menopause to through menopause, because there are massive changes, and also it in terms of what goes on physically for you. You kind of become a little bit more self-obsessed because things aren't working like you, and it's a big change. And then so coming out the other side was is depending on how you do it. So I came out the other side determined, I had put on weight, determined to lose that weight, determined to not be the person, you know, the menopausal, postmenopausal woman that I was with a middle-age spread. I'm not going to do that, hence going to the gym, and hence looking at everything that I could. But, you know, yeah, the last 10 years, slowly it has happened that it's like, until people know me, they don't see me as attractive. Or as I don't, so I no longer turn heads, which is sad for a woman. It's sad for a woman. And you look at the likes of the lovely Jane Judi Dench, who I've spoken about before. She's not necessarily the most beautiful woman in the world, but she's got presence.
Yeah, yeah.
Tiny, she's really short, but she walks into a room, everybody notices her, and that comes from self-assurance and a sense of knowing who you are. And I think if you're not careful as an older woman, and possibly an older man, but I'm only doing it from a female perspective, if you lose yourself in the aging process, and so to have a sense of perspective and a sense of knowing who you are, I think is important, which is, you know, where I talk about sexuality as well. I don't mean having sex all the time. I just mean that sort of sexual flow, that the energy that goes through you is like, I am, this is who I am, regardless of whether I be a feminine being or a masculine being or you know, all the others. But I know who I am and I'm comfortable. And I think once you're comfortable with yourself, that's completely different.
Yeah, I think you can tell as well with people, can't you, whether they're comfortable. You know, I've had conversations where you get a sense of authenticity sometimes with certain people. And you go, well, actually, you're quite happy with all of your works. And I mean, the good news for me is I've never been particularly attractive, Joe, so I haven't got to worry about aging badly. I mean, like I haven't always had all these wrinkles, but it's been a good thing. One thing you mentioned now is, it's really interesting because I do think there's a clear difference, and I know we've spent time when we should have been speaking to other people chatting about this.
Yeah.
The difference in aging between men and women, and how that differs and alters, and the challenges that I might face as a I'm not 60 plus yet, I've got a few years to go, but the challenges that men face as they age compared to women. What do you think the difference is?
Interestingly enough, we've got the Battle of the Sexes, It's Not Fair, goes out tomorrow. But and I think that's another perspective. I need to talk to more men about that. But I think for a man, it's the changes that I understand. So the physical changes are perceived as being, you know, we look at George Clooney or Brad Pitt, who are all in their 60s now, and it's perceived, you know, the silver fox. And so going old as a man gives you more, you're more distinguished.
Authority, potentially.
Yeah,
I
think the aging process for a man physically happens later in life, and that's and then you become invisible as well. I think there's a whole behind the scenes, there's a whole lot going on for a man. So again, we've got the retirement. Who am I if I'm not the provider? Who am I? And also there, dare I say it, there's sexual performance stuff that can go on for a man as well in their 60s. So, you know, who am I in bed when I'm not the dominant person is also a problem for men, an issue for men, but they don't look, it doesn't show. So, you know, they carry on being distinguished. No one knows that they are feeling, unless of course, you know, they've gone into a slump, but no one knows anything that's going on the psychological. So there's definitely psychological and emotional challenges for a man in terms of purpose and who am I and how do I perform. But the physicality doesn't start happening until later.
And how's that different when we compare the challenges that women might face?
So we have physical challenges. So definitely have physical challenges that we have the possibility of osteoporosis. We've got the do we take HRT? And we have physically what we look like. We put on weight. We seem to get more wrinkly because we don't have the same hormone levels that we used to have. All of that stuff happens kind of like suddenly, gradually, but suddenly. And you go, fuck, I am my mother. How did that happen? It's like,
you know what? I mean, I'm in my late 40s now, and I realised a few years ago that I turned into my dad when I was saying stuff to my kids. And you you get to that point where you go, I can't believe I've just said that. I when I was younger, you're like, I'm never going to be that person. And do you think there's just this? It's really interesting. I think there's an inevitability of that.
Yeah.
But you're always thinking about how to avoid the negative elements and learn from what you don't want to do. But yeah, I with a teenager in a room in an absolute mess, 1,000,000% of the time, it's an interesting conversation. What you've mentioned about sex and sexuality. Tell me about what you've learned as you've got older about how we should potentially look at this as we get a bit older.
Big topic. A big topic. So
where would you like to start?
How long have we got? Briefly. So in terms of same with any muscle, use it or lose it. We have talked about you don't necessarily need to be having sex in order to use your muscles for a woman. So there is, I mean, if you don't use your muscles and you're not having active sex and you're using your vaginal muscles, then you do run the risk of being incontinent and stuff like that, because it just happens. So you don't necessarily need to have sex in order to do that. There's equipment that you can use to stop it from atrophying, but it's the same as gym work. You don't work out, you don't work your muscles and don't use them, then you've got a problem. You could have a problem. Sure. So we have talked about, in one of our episodes, we talked about masturbation. We've talked about in terms of there are vaginal cones that you can get to keep the muscles going, because as a woman, you use your muscles when you're having sex, or you use before menopause. You use your muscles when you're inserting tampons and stuff like that. So there's muscle power. So it's keeping it going. We're not saying go out and get laid all the time. We're just saying, it's important to think about that as well, which of course is something you didn't have to think about when you were young. You're either getting laid or you're having a period, and it happens post menopause too. So so on the physical level, it's important, but actually on the sort of like keeping your energy flowing and keeping yourself soft and open and attractive, you need to feel attractive. So whether or not you're doing it with yourself or you're doing it with somebody else, it's important to keep that flow going in some shape or form, because touch is so important.
Sure.
And a lot of older people don't necessarily have touch, but they don't think that they can even just stroke their own skin. It's like, so yes, it's key. It doesn't need to die. It shouldn't die, because we then get into body problems for women. And then for men, well, it's important to keep an eye on their prostate, very much so. And it's I don't know enough about erectile dysfunction in as much how it actually works, but I do know that is a key psychological and emotional factor for men as well when that happens.
Sure. No, it's really interesting. What have you learned most since you've been starting the podcast? What's the thing where you've gone, I didn't know that before, and now I've got a bit more of an insight into it?
So the thing that I've learned most is the need for community.
Yeah.
The fact that actually we're not in this alone. I'm not in this alone. I've had a lot of people say, "Oh my God, I didn't realize that. I thought I was all by myself." I'm so glad you mentioned that. Thank you. Yeah.
But this is the thing. Like, this is one of the big things that we talk about on What Happens Next. We talk about friendships, and that's really important. But And it's interesting because the more we look into the research in this, you look at the Blue Zones research, for example.
Yeah.
The Japanese, the Okinawans have these things called moai, which is like a friendship tribe that all help each other. And actually, the shape of that community doesn't really matter. I'm a bit obsessed with paddle tennis at the minute, so I'm playing paddle tennis 3 or 4 times a week, and it's one of those things where I'm not that great, Joe. I go along and whack a ball a little bit. I go for the chat. I go for the feeling of togetherness in terms of what that generates. And this is the interesting thing. That element of Women's Institute is a perfect example, right?
Yeah.
That element of being surrounded by people who can act as your community is fundamental. And when we talk about on what happens next, I'm not religious, but some people get that from church. Some people get that from their faith. But actually having something bigger than you that you can contribute to, I think is really important, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. The contribution is a key factor in growth, isn't it? And also, but also what's really important is a sense of security and belonging is really important.
Yeah. So tell me about how you get that. How do you get that in your life?
My sense of belonging. So my sense of belonging comes from my friendships. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm obviously and my relationship and my children, but if I was to lose my if my partner were to die, I'd get that from my friends. The sense of belonging. I belong in a small group of friends that I've known for ages, and they just know me, and I don't need to be anything. And so I've recently moved in with my partner, as I said. So I'm now having to make friends, which is a little bit more challenging as you get older because you don't make the friends at the school gates or anything like that. So part of joining the group that we're both in together is making friends in a new area.
Yeah, that's big, isn't it? It's that doing that thing that allows you to. How do you make friends as you get older? And for a lot of people, that's tough. I remember having a conversation when we did the podcast about kindness with a guy called Jason, and he told me about a friendship he had with. So Jason at the time was in his mid-40s, and he signed up with AUK's companionship scheme, which partnered him with a 82-year-old Liverpudlian called Elsie. And he went into the scheme feeling really benevolent. So he was like, I'm doing a great thing and I'm helping the. And then what he realised when he built this friendship with her is she was absolutely fascinating. Like she was at the Cavern Club when the Beatles started and had like this massive life experience that he was like really excited to learn about and understand. And I suppose that's interesting, isn't it? Have you ever seen that show, Old People's Home for 3-year-olds?
No.
So it used to be on Channel 4, and it was a show where they combined a nursery with a old people's home, and actually just got the kids and the older people to mix. And it was a fascinating social experiment because there was so much.
They're making an old people's home.
Yeah, I don't know where you can get it now. I mean, it was on Channel 4 years ago.
On YouTube.
But really, a really interesting social experiment that I think gives real insight into loneliness as well. Because what they did is they showed that health improved for the older people by just simply being around the kids.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. What's your perspective on mortality? How do you think our relationship with death changes as we get older?
So I can only talk about it because I haven't done any interviews on mortality yet, but I can only do it from my own perspective. It becomes more inevitable, and it becomes, as Galen has said on a couple of occasions on the podcast, the runway is getting shorter, so it's coming.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think like most people, my view on mortality is that it's going to happen at some stage. Please don't let it be long and prolonged and painful. So I want to do a podcast on euthanasia because I so believe in that. And I'm more concerned, and I've actively signed up petitions and all of that kind of stuff that I didn't do before.
I mean, the conversations we're having now are far better, aren't they? In terms of what Kim Ledbetter's doing in government, and actually having conversations about the fact that we make it difficult for people to make that choice, even though in the UK. So it's good. It's good that we're doing that. I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What makes you tick?
What makes me tick? So I really enjoy, I enjoy food, and I enjoy good company as well. So I do that one, that sort of like my joie de vivre is like, I don't know, embracing life and going out. I will do anything once. I'll try something once within reason. Obviously, if it's, if it's holding up a bank, I won't do that. But I'll try everything once just to see whether I like it. If I don't like it, I won't do it. But I'm adventurous. So keeping an open mind, enjoying my life with my friends, and eating. Yeah,
eating's good. Eating's good, particularly cheese. But that's just me. What new experience have you had that you really enjoyed? And what did you like?
So the new experience that I had, I did. I've done Go Ape. I went there with my stepsons. I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, and enjoyed it. I was terrified. I enjoyed it, zip wiring and stuff. I had done zip wire before. I can't remember, but I do remember the whole thing with being because I'm scared of heights, but I'm not really. And then I went skiing, age 57, 58, first time.
Okay.
I didn't master it. Didn't like it. Hurt myself.
Right. I've never skied, and I'm tempted to give it a go. So
do it before it gets too late. Do it before it gets too late, and you lose it.
Really.
But I did do it, and I can do it, but I didn't enjoy it. I gave myself hell over not being able to do it. So.
You know what's interesting? As my life evolves, so I always think about saying no to more stuff that I don't like. Has your perspective changed?
No, I might say yes.
Your yes, and then
no.
I'll give it a go. Yeah,
give it a go.
Brilliant. And talk to me about the future for the podcast.
Tomorrow is Battle of the Sexes. We are on episode 9. I mean, my intention is to keep going because I'm really enjoying it. Although we haven't got a big audience, they are listening. The listening figures are long, so people are obviously enjoying it. I've had some very good feedback. So grow it. And if anybody wants to sponsor it, that would help us grow it and help us reach more people. And then behind the scenes, I want to set up some communities. I haven't quite worked out how we do that, but I want people to join in. So that's the future. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely love that. Tell me a little bit about where people can find out a bit more about you and the podcast. So
the podcast can be found on Apple and Spotify at the moment. And I've got, we are on Instagram and Facebook, but the podcast is When the Fuck Did I Become Old?
Perfect. All right, Jo, it's been a pleasure speaking to you today.
I loved it. We've been nearly an hour, Chris.
I know. It's good.
It's fab. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.